Hey friends, Andy here, and welcome to another episode of the podcast. On the show today, I have Andrew and Levi, who are both doctors and professors of kinesiology. I first met them when I was on their podcast. They were nice enough to have me. And when they talk about things online, when they make content, they say they focus on 4 F's: faith, family, fitness, and finance. And so in this episode of my podcast, I want to focus on those last 2 F's, the fitness and finances aspect. And specifically, since you're both doctors, I have this thing going on with my knee. If you could just, I'm just kidding. Thank you
We'll do a
both
quick
very
eval
much.
afterwards. No worries.
Yeah.
Thank you
Needs
both for being
analysis.
on the podcast.
Hey, happy
Yeah,
to
thanks
be
for
here.
having
Thanks,
us.
Andy.
Yeah.
Yeah, can I drag and drop my MRI results onto this thing? Real quick?
Yeah,
As long
right.
as you don't mind sharing that publicly, let's take a look.
Yeah.
Well, thank you both again for being on the podcast. So I'd love to start, if you could, go through both of your. I know this is a big question, but just some of your background in both fitness and finance, but also just why kinesiology? Why did you pursue this aspect in life?
Go ahead,
Go for it,
Levi. I'll
Andrew.
let you
Kick us
start.
off. Oh, I see how it is. Okay, so
Beat
for
you to
me, lifetime athlete. I grew up playing every single sport you can imagine. Ended up falling on baseball as a collegiate athlete, and that was really my driver. I went to school to play sports, and then soon realized that I was a big fish in a small pond, and that everyone was as good or substantially better than me at the college level. And so my focus shifted from being an athlete only and began realizing the importance of academics and how I needed something to kind of move forward. And maybe that's another topic, academia and higher education. But for me, that was the direction that I went. I did not know what I wanted to do because, like I said, sports was my thing. And eventually, I fell upon this word kinesiology, which I had no idea of what it was. And in short, it's the study of the human body. And I found this to be fascinating as an athlete. I loved training, I loved working out and being fit and active. And so this just fell right into my lap and became a passion of mine. My original direction was to get into strength and conditioning. I wanted to work with collegiate athletes. And that kind of started to shift to the tactical community. This is fire, police, military, first responders. And that's pretty much the demographic that I work with more specifically today. But in that journey of strength and conditioning, I've worked with everyone from kids all the way to geriatric 93-year-olds to bariatric obese patients to professional athletes. And so I've gotten to see kind of the wide spectrum of quality of movement, of freak show human performance. I mean, when you watch a guy bench press 600 pounds, it blows the mind. So I've got to see some pretty cool things. And I realize, though, that in the strength conditioning world, it's kind of a 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. type of gig. And $35,000 a year at the time, and realized that wasn't going to be the way I was going to support my family. And so I started, but what I realized is that I really like the education piece, teaching people and empowering folks. And so, like I said, I was working with the tactical community and got to get into a junior college and teach there. And that then ascended into a 4-year institution that I teach at now. But it was all kind of began from a love of athletics and just training.
What made you kind of gravitate towards that tactical community?
Funny enough, I was working with my friend's girlfriend at the time. She was a collegiate soccer player. I was training her, and she asked me, "Hey, do you want to train my mom?" And I go, "Nope, no, I'm good. I want to, I want to work with collegiate athletes." And she goes, "No, train for my mom." And I'm like, "Well, what does she do?" And she said that she was the first female chief in Anaheim here in California, and that she started running the part-time academy at a local fire academy here where I live. And she said she needs someone to train those cadets. And so I started training them. And then that kind of snowballed into working with full-time firefighters and then law enforcement, military, et cetera.
That's cool. Cool. Well, Andrew, I'd love to hear your background too.
Yeah, so kind of very similar beginnings in that I think probably very similar with a lot of people who are in our field of kinesiology, that most of us are interested in sports at some degree. And so that was kind of my background as well, of kind of growing up just loving to play sports and being interested in exercise, fitness, etc. That for me, it took a little bit of a different form early on compared to Levi, in that I was headed more down towards the physical therapy route, and so that was kind of more the rehab side, and mostly I would say because that seemed to be a good job. Andy, when we were talking last time, you mentioned how you kind of got sidetracked for a little bit in your entrepreneurship journey, and I was reflecting on that a little bit, and I feel like a very similar thing happened kind of in my background, in that I feel like I have a little bit of an entrepreneurship kind of bug in me that I didn't know about at the time. I grew up in a very kind of traditional family. My dad was a physician, and so the medical field was one that made a lot of sense to me. It was kind of like, oh yeah, that's a good career and a good job, and this was as close as I thought I could get to kind of working with a population in that kind of athletic sense of rehab. That makes sense. And so I spent quite a bit of time pursuing physical therapy, and actually got into physical therapy school. That's where I met my wife. But kind of in the road leading up to that, was experiencing kind of burnout. I mean, it's physical therapy. I don't want to denigrate the field. There's a lot of repetition. Most physical therapists are kind of outpatient clinical, orthopedic type centers, and they're doing a lot of shoulders and like you mentioned, knees and backs. And the people are different, but the injuries are oftentimes very similar. And you do a lot of the same things over and over and over all day in the same spot, 7 a.m. to 6 p.m. And I did that for many years and was just kind of burned out. Didn't really love that, but I wasn't sure what else to do. And so on that road to getting into physical therapy school, I actually started a master's of kinesiology and got to experience teaching. Very similar to what Levi said, is that kind of was like, oh, I own my time a lot more. Teaching is a much more flexible schedule. We both work online. We're very blessed to be able to teach online and have pretty much complete ownership of our schedule. And so teaching became something of interest to me at that point, and kind of higher education was like, okay, the schedule's better. I like kind of working and teaching others as well. And then one of the other things I did during that time as well was personal training. And that was very much more of an entrepreneurship type thing, where the success or failure of the personal training business was up to me. And so that was a light bulb moment for me in two ways. Number one, kind of seeing that aspect of, I can put money and time into this and make myself better and kind of invest in me as the business and get better at this, which was a lot of fun. That was the most fun I had had at a job up to that point. That was personal training. And then the second piece was, it was also a light bulb in that I realized, if I'm not here, I'm not making money. And very much kind of you trade your time for money type of thing. And those two things it was kind of an interesting conundrum, because I enjoyed it. And I enjoyed the entrepreneurship aspect of it, but I also realized there's no leverage, right? Now I would use that term now, but the time aspect of it was a big challenge. And so anyway, all that to be said, that kind of shifted me into, well, higher education is a good, maybe happy medium. And so I got my PhD and wanted to teach. And so that's what we do kind of professionally now, is we teach, but we're also interested in this same entrepreneurship idea of what are some of the other things that we can create and develop. And so that's where we are today, is kind of experimenting with some of that and trying some things out, and all with the same goal of trying to help people, specifically kind of our expertise in the health area, but some of these other aspects of finance and family as well too. So that's my background.
Mm-hmm.
Very cool. And so I would guess that some of this online creation stuff is also kind of scratching that entrepreneurial itch. Is that correct?
Very much so, I think. Yeah, I think it's there's a huge opportunity out there. I think it's hard to see the opportunity for online creation and the scale that you can reach, right? If we sit down in a traditional education setting, what do you have? Maybe 30 to 100 people that you can influence, versus if you can create a video or some sort of piece of content online, hashtag content, right? The scale is effectively, millions, billions perhaps, but yeah, it's the same idea of, we really enjoy this aspect of kind of like, hey, the learning journey is a lot of fun, I think, and being able to kind of walk back a step or two and look at where people are kind of coming up behind you and say, oh, here's some things to look out for. Here's some things that really helped me. I just think it's a lot of fun. So it's definitely scratching that itch for me.
That's cool.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Levi.
As teaching, seeing the light bulb moment is that's what keeps you coming back. That's the hit of adrenaline that you would get as an athlete or an extreme sports person. When you see someone go, Oh, and then beyond that, when they can repeat that too. I think it's one thing to see the light bulb moment for folks, but then we've all experienced it when you solve the math problem at school, and then you go home and you try that same formula and you have no idea what you did. You have the light bulb moment at school, but then you can't kind of continue that on. And I think that's the my favorite part about teaching is the light bulb moment, but then also the ability to problem solve and continue to generate those light bulb moments for the individual and have them become autonomous and then be able to learn on their own. I think is a very exciting piece of teaching for me.
Yeah, that's the it all registers, it all makes sense, it clicks. That's a pretty cool feeling.
Mm-hmm.
And jumping back to what you were saying, Andrew, about like this, making stuff online or putting content out there or just putting yourself out there in general. I sometimes think back to when I first started my channel, and when I was still working for that first 1,000 subscribers, even that first 100 subscribers, and a video would get 15 views, or the first time one of my videos got to 100 views, it's easy to go, wow, it's 100 views. Where's my thousands of views or whatever? And and because that's sexy, it's like thousands, millions of views. Like my channel, I don't even have millions of views on my current channel. But it's also exciting if you can just focus on the other side, which is like, hey, 100 people. Like I just made this thing and it reached 100 people, which is just weird. Like, what is the internet? Like this thing that we use every day. I just think it's too cool. And the opportunities there are just very exciting to me. So Levi, one other thing I want to talk about in your background. Now, correct me if I'm wrong here, but I remember from when I was on your podcast, you have a farm. Is that right?
I have the vague resemblance of a farm.
Okay.
So I live in a little mountain town, 20,000 people, and I live on the outskirts of that. So we're pretty rural, but I'm not like in the true sticks where it's like me and then every 50 miles is another house. But we were blessed and fortunate enough to buy some land up here. We have a little bit over 30 acres. And over the last 3-4 years, we've just been in the process of developing it. So we've have a garden every year. We have chickens. And we're building infrastructure to be able to have, smaller animals and get even into cows and whatnot. What we found is just, again, you need the infrastructure for it, and that takes time, it takes money, and a lot of creativity and planning as well, which I didn't think of as much. For example, when you get weather, you can use the rain, for example, to your advantage. And if you cut and make swales and direct the water appropriately, you could water your entire property from the rainfall that landed on the top of the hill. And so we're kind of in that process of planning and preparing and just developing our land to be able to help it work for us and sustain our family. So we're well on our way, but we're not where we want to be just yet. So.
That's super cool. Also, I love that there's a rooster crowing in the background as you talk about.
He's there. Yep. Sorry, Rocky the rooster. He's always around. So
no, that's Rocky the rooster. Okay, I
Yep.
love that. Okay, cool. Let's turn towards some fitness, some health and fitness here, and there's a few different things I'd like to discuss here, but. This is a very broad question, so for both of you, however you want to answer this, it could be really general, you can get specific, or you can maybe tell me what's a better question to ask. But for someone listening to this that isn't really into health and fitness, or maybe they're very casual or whatever, what would you say is the best way to get started, or the best way to think about how to get started?
You want to jump on that first, Andy?
It's kind of funny. Yeah, it's funny. I was kind of thinking through kind of in preparation for this, Andy, and kind of trying to think of what are some of the ways that we can maybe find similarities between health and wealth, because I think there's a ton of parallels and a lot of overlap. And one of the best lessons I got financially that I think is the same kind of answer to your question is knowing your why. Kind of like when you pursue a financial goal, like you have to have a why, like a reason to work forward, or a goal to be working towards. And I think same thing with health. A lot of times the natural kind of default state in our current world is not very healthy. And it's easy to fall into that and just kind of just be, right? Like not eat healthy, not exercise, not sleep well. And I think in order to change that pattern, you need to have a target in mind and a reason why you want to do that. And so that's the first thing I think of is have a why, and then be able to kind of formulate that into a goal, and then you can always backtrack and reverse engineer how to get there with people like us, and kind of get the help of what are some of the steps that we need to take. But I think very similarly to finance, it's start small. Do some things that you can do right now. Maybe it's going for one of the things we like talking about. We got this from a guest named Stan Efferding, who's a big fitness guy, bodybuilder and powerlifter, is go for a 10-minute walk after every meal. Really easy, low barrier to entry. Going for a 30-minute walk is like, do I really want to do that? You're gonna fight yourself on some days, right? But at 10 minutes, almost all of us can do that right away. And so it's like, find those little things that you can do to get some skin in the game that are in alignment with whatever that why or your goal is. And then once you start, you're going to start thinking about it more. You're going to start saying, okay, maybe I can do a little bit more the next day, something like that. So it's start small, build from there. Momentum, I think, is a huge component of many things in life.
Is there a wrong way to approach your why? Is there a way you should approach your why?
That's an interesting question. I think for me, you can kind of, and not having all the time to think about it. I think it's a very good question. For me, I used to watch, for example, late night infomercials, and you'd have all the gimmicks, and you'd see like the abs, and the sweatbands and all this stuff that go around the abdomen.
Gazelle,
and I'm like,
with Tony
yeah,
Little.
Excel. Oh, Tony Little, man, that ponytail is just rocking. Yeah. So, like those types of things where you see gimmicks and you go, well, that's not any good. But then I started to realize, I'm like, but if the gimmick is what gets you going, then I don't care. I don't care what gets you started, whether it's vanity, whether it's health, whether it's to be cool. As long as you end on the idea that we should be aiming to live as healthy of a life as possible while still having fun and doing all those other things, the true aim should be health. But if it starts for something else, then so be it. And the reason why I say for health is that the vanity may go away, or the importance or the reason for vanity may go away, but the importance and reason for health will never leave. So that's what I hope kind of people land on. But how you get there, for me, it doesn't really matter, because as long as it gets you going, that's what's important.
There's certainly ways that you're going to expedite that. I think like kind of same answer of like, there's not really a wrong way. It's just some might take a little bit of a longer journey to get where you're going, right? If you're chasing a lot of fads or chasing a lot of gimmicks, you're probably going to spin your wheels a little bit. But like Levi said, if it gets you started down that road, that's still a net win, I think, overall. And then, probably leave it at that. Yeah.
Very cool. So, I love that. I feel the same way about, what I lean into a lot with my channel, with just finances and stuff. And it's like, even if it's maybe the wrong reason to start, if you eventually get on the right path, and you're doing things in a smart way, then I don't really care how you got there. So when it comes to before you realize you need the why, before you start trying to find your why, when you start getting to that place of trying to push yourself towards that, do you think most people have to hit rock bottom, have that revelation? Do you think most people don't need that? Most people arrive at I want to live a healthy lifestyle for other reasons? What do you think is the biggest reason most people gravitate towards that if they haven't had that lifestyle previously?
I think
for me, I see a lot of it is kids. People having kids, and that's kind of like a big wake up moment of, there's another human being that's depending on me living a reasonably healthy life to not only for longevity but quality as well. So that's a big piece, I think, is just having responsibility and other people that depend on you. So I think that's a piece. The other one is, very similar to if you're pursuing wealth, let's say. What's the point of having all the money in the world if you don't have the quality of life to enjoy it? Mm-hmm. And so I think, health and wealth go very much hand in hand, as we've said, in that, if you're not able to enjoy the money that you create or the income that you create, then what are you doing? You're maybe you enjoy the competitive aspect of pursuing that. That's fun too. But I think, again, kind of if you really go back and think about the why, for most of us, I would guess that it has to do with quality of life, and health is a big component of that.
Yeah, and I think too, as you mentioned, Andy, rock bottom definitely helps. I mean, and this kind of goes into the behavior change models where you look at the health belief model and trans theoretical model and all this, which is truly the foundation of adherence and consistency to some of these programs or to a healthy living. But I think rock bottom actually helps because you can only go up from there. And a lot of times when you're kind of in the middle and you got like one toe in, it's like, well, I'm healthy enough. I can wake up. I'm a little sore. I'm not as strong as I'd like to be, or I'm not as in shape as or look the way I want to. I'll just keep living the way I'd like to live. The rock bottom again kind of helps for me. Now, hopefully we get to people before that point. But sometimes we need that in order to get there. And the same thing in the financial world, where it's like, oh, I'm living paycheck to paycheck. I'm not in debt. I'm not really struggling. I'm comfortable. Things are convenient. There's no real need to get out of that. And so when you're poor, when you're broke and you're like, look, I got to get after it, that could be the catalyst for propelling you to some of these, higher levels, if you will, or improvements financially. And the same goes for the fitness as well, I'd say.
Yeah, I'm curious. I'm always curious about that because for finances, I needed rock bottom myself. Like
Hmm.
I knew I read books and stuff, and I just couldn't quite ever get myself to get started until things were just bad enough that I'm like, okay, we're paycheck to paycheck. We have all this
Hmm.
credit card debt. We don't have any savings. We're super anxious and stressed about this whole thing. All right, maybe these experts are making a point. Maybe I
Yeah.
should I should get on this. That's yeah. So
There,
I'm always curious, kind of what people think is what if that's truly a big motivator for a lot of people in different aspects of life.
mhm.
So like along those lines, so let's say you are kind of a newbie or newer when it comes to getting in shape or eating healthy or whatever. What are what are some of the biggest mistakes that most people make when they start taking those first steps, and like how can they avoid those?
That's a great
I,
question. I think for me, it's the trying to do too much too soon. For example, if you're telling people that they need to start investing in X, Y, or Z, and they go, "Great, I'm going to burn the ships and put it all into just that," it probably doesn't end well. So just like in the financial world, it's those baby steps. It's putting $10 away each week. You want to get to $100 or $1,000 each week, but it starts at 10. Same with the training. It starts at, the 10-minute walk and beginning there and letting that progress.
yeah, I would echo the same thing. I think the only, when I- rather than say the only thing to do, this vice versa. Let's say one of the things that we want to try to do is adherence, finding the diet or the exercise program that you can do for decades. Again, like dollar cost averaging.
Hmm.
It's rather than burning the ships, as Levi said, find something that you can do sustainably. Adherence is, I think, it's probably the most important factor for health, is finding something you can consistently do over and over. Because I mean, let's face it, we're kind of lazy people. Most of us have a desire to kind of do as little as possible. And so finding ways to kind of trick the system and put little pieces in that are easy to do, that are low barrier to entry, but also low decision making, right? Anytime there's willpower involved, over time, you're probably going to lose that battle. So I'm a big fan of finding
Hmm.
systems that you can put in place you don't have to waste any mental energy thinking about it. It's like, oh, on Tuesday, I do this. On Thursday, I do this. Or even something as simple as sleep. I go to bed and wake up at the same time every day because that's going to give me the chance to get 8 hours of sleep. Sleep, nutrition, and exercise are kind of the three big pillars that we always talk about for health. And so, again, finding the easiest ways, or the ways to make all those things as easy as possible, I think is the real key, so that you have adherence long term.
Yeah, and also to give
Yeah,
yourself
I
some
think I
grace
think that
too. That's hard. It's hard. It's not easy. If it were easy, everyone would. Well, let me say this. It's simple. It's not easy. Simple in that go to bed, wake up at each time, eat healthy food. These are all simple concepts, but the execution of it is very difficult. And so, giving yourself some grace in that time too, that and remembering that this is a journey. This is long term. It's not. If I fail today, then I've crumbled, and none of this will ever work. It's again the adherence and the consistency that's really going to help long term rather than big movements or big things that you're doing like throwing out your pantry with all the bad food in it. Well, that's great. But like, how do we keep that bad food from coming back in at some point or something along those lines?
So I think that is a good segue, and you have talked a little bit about this. I think in my mind, knowing your why is a big one. Some of those practical things like baby steps, etc., are also a good answer for this. But maybe you could expand on this a bit more, which is you have these ideas, but how do you actually stay motivated and like stick to the plan?
Levi, what would you say?
How do
The first thing I think of is accountability, having people in your life
Mhm.
that are going to kind of be on that journey with you. Not don't do this in a in what's the word? Don't do it in isolation, right? Have people kind of working along this with you. Let them know kind of where you struggle. I think that's a big piece as well, is finding the areas that you know you struggle, and again, setting up. I think the book Atomic Habits does a great job of identifying ways that we can kind of hack our proclivities to work around those and make it a little bit easier for ourselves not to have to rely on willpower all the time.
Yeah, and Andy, you asked, how do you stick to a plan? I think the first thing is getting a plan, having some type of nutritional guidelines, having some type of training guidelines. I know even for me that I could walk into the gym and know what I need to do and it will work. But I also know that after a couple weeks of that, it's like, well, I don't really feel like doing this and I don't really want to do that. Whereas when I have a plan and a program that's set up, the thinking is out of it. And that's coming from someone who's been doing this for a couple decades. So if you've never trained or it hasn't been a priority for you, in order for the plan to work, you have to have the plan. So, finding someone that you trust that's reputable to create some of those plans for you, or there's a million of them online. And Andrew will probably agree with this, is that all training works. It's the person that stays consistent with it that where it like is extremely effective. But it will all work, whether you're doing 3 sets of 5 or 5 sets of 3 or 3 sets of 10 or 10 sets of 3. All of it's going to drive an adaptation because we're lifting external weight or we're moving and we're causing stress. So we will adapt to that. So it all works, but it's having a plan is key in order for the plan to work. So
That's great. So I love what you're saying there, and I was going. My follow up question is going to be, well, how do you come up with a plan? But I love that you kind of already answered that. But I do want a follow up on that. And it makes sense to me. It's like, hey, if I know I need a plan to help me do these things, okay. So I go online. I use these infinite resources that we have now with the internet, etc., and YouTube. Then I get inundated with every YouTube channel or whatever, every fitness blog or every fitness TikTok account. Is there any kind of framework that is like a quick way to assess, is this guy or gal for real? Should I follow, should I follow their plan, their advice? Like, what do you suggest to somebody who's trying to make those like assessments?
I think a very important question, given, like you said, the inundation of information that we have on the internet, right? That's, I think, a huge skill. And one of the things we try to teach our students is how do you sift through all the information out there? And so there's 3 pieces of what would call the evidence-based kind of Venn diagram. So there's peer-reviewed research, there's kind of in the trenches experience, and then there's the needs of the individual. So those 3 kind of bubbles make up this big picture. And that's what I would encourage people to look for, is someone who's practicing this. It's kind of a buzzword now, but evidence-based practice is, do they look at research? Are they actually looking at, what's happening scientifically? Do they have kind of a finger on the pulse there? And science typically, it kind of lags behind, right? We typically, there's limits, right, to what we can test in a laboratory or in a scientific study. There are limits there. So there are challenges, but that's one piece. The other piece, like I said, is kind of being in the trenches. Do they actually work with clients? There's a lot of people online. Social media is a great example of, you'll see people who have never worked with a single client before, but they're pumping out exercise programs to sell, right? So do they actually work with people, and what are the results of those people, right? There needs to be a proof of concept there, I would say, of, does this actually work? Is there scientific support? Does it actually work in the real world? And then what are your individual needs? So do they consider do you have food allergies? Do you have injuries? Do you have limitations in some way? So those three pieces, I would say, are the critical things to look for as you evaluate kind of the whole mess that's out there with information and people selling everything.
Yeah, for me, it would be first identifying what your goal is, and that will kind of direct where you kind of focus your, who you're starting to look at as an expert in that field. For example, if you want to get stronger, then you would go down a particular route. If you're going more for aesthetics, you'd go down another route. If you're going down general health, that's another route. And so first identify your goal or what your desired outcome is. And then from there, start looking at, you got to put in the work at the end of the day. There really isn't a shortcut here. You got to spend the time, and you're going to mess up. And that's the grace part, is you might get fooled with some snake oil, and that's okay. But continue the journey, continue the process, and you'll find like the cream rises to the top. And so what I would say is those that have stood the test of time, those are the people, like, it doesn't discredit people that haven't been doing it as long, but definitely look at the people that have been around the longest, and explore some of their work. I think about, if you're looking at developing strength, get into Louis Simmons' work, get into Mark Ripeto's work. They've been around for decades, and there's going to be, there's things to critique for sure, but they're tried and true and their practices are proven. And there's that version of all different modalities of training, whether again, it's general health, aesthetics, or whatever. There's people in those industries, that have been around for decades that you can rely upon what they're saying.
That's great. That's great advice. Yeah, I think so you both bring up such good points. It's like it's such a landscape filled with all this stuff. So I love that there's some ways you can kind of assess that. And I feel like, especially what you were just saying, Levi, there's so many parallels between, health across the board, even with financial health. And I think the crypto, especially, I've been so into that. So many people, they want that quick win. They want those fast overnight success. And the reality of most of this stuff is it's like it takes time. It takes lots of work. It's lots of effort, lots of fails along the way where you learn how to do it better the next time. And the people who are successful are the ones who don't give up and they keep on learning and iterating and getting better. It seems it's just an exact parallel for fitness, it seems, in my mind. So along with, fitness, there's obviously working out, and you've already talked a little bit about, diet and sleep. Like, what is a more complete picture? What are all the things someone needs to be looking at when they start assessing their overall fitness?
There are a number of categories. Go ahead, Levi.
Sorry. I can throw it to somebody first, and the other person can take over afterwards. Sorry.
Yeah.
It's my first time doing a 2-person podcast.
Yeah.
No worries. I think we're fighting the delay a little
sure.
bit, but it's all good. Yeah.
Go for it, Andrew.
Go ahead, Levi.
No.
You.
We could do this all day. Let's play some ping pong too. So when you say assessment, what do you mean by assessing a person's health? Like I look in the mirror and I don't like what I see, or, what do you mean?
Well, I mean, specifically, maybe you can just go into more depth about what you mean about it's more than just the working out. It's also the sleep. It's also the diet. Like, how do you assess the more multifaceted element of health? How do I say, okay, this is how I get started on this whole working out thing? How do I get started on thinking about better sleep habits? How do I get started on better nutrition habits? But also, is that a full picture? Is there something else on top of that I should be considering as a new person jumping into this?
Yeah, I think, it's one of those things where we can operate at 80% of our potential, and we don't realize that we're operating at 80% of our potential. We think, oh, we're doing great and we're doing okay. And so if you have any thought or idea of changing some of this behavior, I would encourage people to try these things for 30 days. Try training 3 days a week for 30 days. Try changing something about your diet consistently that's sustainable and realistic for 30 days. Try changing your sleep behavior for 30 days. Those really are the 3 pillars. And you can kind of go down specific trails with each of those and have guidelines and practices for each of those. But when someone's wondering what they should do, I say you got to test it for at least 30 days. And this does a couple things for me. We'll generally see some type of result. We won't see the end outcome. Like I'm not going to go from 30% body fat to 12% body fat and shredded and looking great in 30 days, but we will see some type of change. So, which is nice. We always want to see something. But then number two is that it's going to let us know whether it's actually sustainable or not. It's great if you want to do a fast from all sugar for 30 days, but is that realistic? Are you going to be that person that goes to someone's birthday party and everyone's eating cake and you go, oh, don't worry, I have my own. I brought it in my Tupperware. Don't be that guy, right? So there is an element of making some realistic goals and whatnot, but that 30 days for me is also going to let you know how sustainable it really is, more specifically in that moment. There's certain things that may not be sustainable today, but in 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, it is sustainable for you. But you need to do some of those small things that are low barrier of entry or low hanging fruit, as Andrew mentioned, that then you can stack on top of those moving forward. But in kind of evaluating what you need to work on, what you want to do, what's successful for you, give something 30 days and then pivot and shift as needed. If you go, wow, I really like this, then keep doing it. And when it stops working, try something else. So that's kind of my general guideline for assessing and trying to figure out how to implement some of this stuff is give it a try for 30 days, regardless of that modality, sleep, exercise, or otherwise.
Yeah, and so what I'm hearing is maybe you're giving one of those things an attempt for 30 days, and then if it works and sticks, then maybe you add on the next thing or something like that. So maybe you start doing an exercise habit, and then maybe that sticks after 30 days, then maybe the next 30 days you continue that, but then you start working on maybe getting in bed by a certain time and getting up at a certain time. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, because otherwise,
Okay,
like
very
I
cool.
said, if you're doing everything all at once, it's like if you say we can convince someone to go to Starbucks 2 less times per week at $5.50 for a latte. That's $11 a week. And so financially, that's now almost $50 a month that you are already spending, but you're just reallocating it to something else. But then you take that $50 and then you do, maybe you only eat out once a week or you eat out one less time a week. And so we're just trying to reallocate time is really what this is. It's typically not an effort. There's people that are certainly incapable physically of exercising in particular ways, but mostly it's a time management and a psychological thing that we have to get over in that kind of journey. And if we can commit to something for 30 days, we see a lot of benefit of habit forming, as well as, whether or not this thing is sustainable for you.
The only thing I'll
maybe-
add on to that. Oh, go ahead, Eddie. I was just gonna say the only thing I'll add on to that
Jump in.
is there are 5 kind of categories of fitness that are kind of talked about. And I don't know if this is where you're going with that question, but to throw those out, like there are these elements of muscular strength, muscular endurance, flexibility, body composition, and then kind of this cardiorespiratory endurance. And so those 5 categories are always a great kind of basis. If you're talking about like assessment, those are some things that you would look at to say, okay, maybe you can bench 300 pounds, but your cardio is terrible. Are you fit? Well, it depends, right? It's kind of, what are we measuring you by? So anytime you're talking about assessment, let's look at the whole picture or the whole person. And those elements are what we would, tell people to look at. Now, what we've found is all of those can kind of be boiled down, or we're going to check as many boxes as is realistically possible by hitting those exercise, nutrition, and sleep habits. And so that's kind of what we've kind of boiled things down to as our 3 pillars: sleep, nutrition, exercise, because they allow us to check all those other boxes without, I'm not going to go measure my body composition once a month. I'm not going to go get blood work done every month. I'm not going to go do an exercise stress test to see how my heart is every month. But if I can have some of these targets or things that I'm checking off with sleep, with nutrition, with exercise, I know that those other markers are probably where they should be. And then maybe once a year or every other year, I actually go in and test those and see kind of, okay, are things where they should be? If not, maybe I need to make some changes.
Yeah, that's great. I think that applies to all areas of life you want to work on. Knowing how to measure it in the first place gives you much better idea of how to get specific results. Because if you're just going in blindly without an idea of actually what you're measuring or how you're measuring it, yeah, same with finances, same with all kinds of things in life. You're setting yourself up for failure. So maybe, and maybe Andrew, you could kick us off on this one. I want to talk about sleep for a little bit because you both keep talking about this. How can someone get into a better place to set themselves up for better health and well-being through better sleep?
Yeah, so this is a big one, and this is one that, admittedly, this was a thing that I neglected for a long time, going through school and even the probably first 5 years after school. Sleep was never a huge priority for me until I actually, there's an education piece. I did not know how big of a role sleep plays with our health and with so many other things that we do day to day. Memory consolidation, just even the way our bodies deal with food, right? So one of the things that we see in research with sleep deprivation is there's two things actually. Number one, you actually will choose to eat foods that are worse for you if you're sleep deprived. And number two, your body actually does a worse job handling those foods. So you'll typically kind of crave more of those sweet, sugary type foods that are high fat, high carbohydrate. And then your body actually responds to that carbohydrate differently when you're sleep deprived, meaning it does not process the sugars as well, and you tend to actually accumulate more body fat. It's a very kind of miniaturized version of what happens with diabetes or type 2 diabetes. And so again, a big part of this for me was just the education piece of how important sleep is. And there's some really great research out there. Matthew Walker's book, Why We Sleep, is a great resource I would direct people to if they're interested in this whole sleep thing. But I would kind of try to boil it down in a few ways. So I mentioned this idea of going to bed and waking up at the same time every day. Number one, for me, the challenge was always going to bed on time, because there's always another YouTube video I want to watch, or you get stuck on the doom scrolling on Instagram and things like that, right? We've all been there. But having that same time in bed and same wake up time, including the weekends. Another area that I struggled with for a long time was realizing that, maybe I shouldn't just sleep in an extra 2 hours on the weekend. Kids will change this very quickly for you as well. That was a big driver for me. One of the other things that we know is beneficial is just the way we kind of engage with light. And this is an area that Dr. Andrew Huberman has put a lot of time and effort into kind of popularizing lately. He's got a great podcast as well on a lot of these kind of biohacking things you can do. But one of the things we know that it affects circadian rhythms and when we kind of start getting tired is our exposure to light. So in the mornings, we want to be exposing ourselves to sunlight or very bright white light if you don't have access to the sun when you wake up. And in the evenings, the opposite. We want soft yellow light, or kind of exactly what you'd see as the sun goes down, and then kind of exposing yourself to more darkness in those couple hours leading up to bedtime. So light plays a big role in kind of when you start feeling tired, as well as kind of the hormonal release that plays a role in our sleep habits. As I said, try to aim for being in bed for 8 hours. That's 7 is the minimum, and there's people that will say, "Hey, I can do just fine on 5 or 6." The research shows us that there's a very small, effectively, it's not zero, but close enough to zero to say no, you don't. You need at least 7. Ideally, you should be aiming for 8. As soon as we're under 7, we see quite a bit of change in our ability to process food, to consolidate memories, there's so many things that go into the sleep deprivation and what that impacts. But aim for 8. Caffeine is another piece that we can try to limit caffeine intake at least 10 to 12 hours ahead of bedtime because of the half-life of caffeine. Caffeine stays in your system for 10 to 12 hours. And so trying to cut that off 10 to 12 hours before bedtime is an important piece as well, so that you're not dealing with caffeine in your system. And then finally, alcohol. This is another one that we know impacts sleep quite a bit. It's tricky because alcohol makes people sleepy, and so they think it's going to help them sleep. It may help you get to sleep, but when you're actually sleeping, you have these little micro wake-ups that happen over and over with alcohol in your system. And so limiting and avoiding alcohol, really, especially making sure that it's out of your system prior to sleep, is an important piece.
Yeah, I think what Andrew's trying to say is definitely day drink instead of drink at the nighttime. So if you didn't get anything else out of it, that's exactly what he said and nothing else. So no, I mean, I'm
morning
just
beers only.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah. No, so that all that stuff. I'm going to be repeating what Andrew said, but I think this kind of goes back to what I said earlier: is that you won't recognize how bad your sleep is until you get enough sleep. Meaning that you can you can still wake up and perform your job and do all those things, but you won't realize that you're operating at the 70-80% capacity until you have fully recharged your batteries. So when you're not sleeping well, you're always kind of operating at a deficit. And so getting the sleep in is critical. This one too is hard for me. It's the, you'll sleep when you're dead and all that kind of stuff. That's just not the mentality to have for longevity, health, wellness, performance, and otherwise. And like Andrew said, there is cognitive decline with a lack of sleep. And with as many things that are as thrown at us and as many as things as we want to do, you want to be as recovered as possible. And the best way to do that is sleep.
One other thing to add in there, Andy.
So many
sorry.
good things.
Is the value of
go
a
for
sleep journal. This is something that we kind of discovered recently when we were actually testing out a supplement. Magnesium glycinate was actually the supplement we were looking at to see if it would influence sleep for us. And what we kind of discovered along the way was just the practice of having a sleep journal where you're recording kind of, how do I feel when I wake up? How many hours of sleep did I get? That was actually the more impactful practice rather than the supplement. It was just this act of when you wake up, asking yourself, how do I feel? Do you feel rested? And if not, that's a very easy indicator that, okay, maybe I should do something a little bit differently when I go to bed or go to bed earlier. And so that's one other piece that I would encourage people to experiment with for 30 days. Like Levi said, is keep track of how many hours you're sleeping and how you feel when you wake up, and allow that to kind of dictate or maybe make some changes to your schedule.
Yeah, this is great. There's so many interesting things to ask here. But real quick on the sleep journal, is that all you ask, or is there other things that are helpful to ask yourself in that sleep journal?
So there's a piece or a survey that we actually were using. It's a research instrument called the Pittsburgh Sleep Index, and you can find this online. There's copies of this you can find for free. You can download. Levi? Was it sleepuniversity.com? That was where you found that version.
Yep.
Something like that, where it was basically like an automated calculator. You can answer these. It's a series of 5 or 10 questions that you can ask, every day, and it kind of tallies up a total global score for you. And that's a really easy index that you can use to kind of measure some other things. There are things like, did you wake up during the night? Did you, there's actually some questions like if you have a bed partner or a spouse, or do you snore? Did you wake up for different reasons, et cetera? So there's kind of a handful of questions that you can ask. But I think the easiest way to assess that without getting into research instruments is, how do you feel when you first wake up? Because it's a very easy indicator of, of your sleep quality. It's not precise perhaps, but it's a very low barrier to entry version of that.
Yeah, that's really helpful. So how you talked about the importance of sticking to a sleep schedule, getting to bed on a time, at the same time or whatever, sticking to that schedule. What are some tips to actually like stick to that? Like, how do you force yourself to, do you have a wind down time? How do you force yourself to initiate that? Then how do you force yourself to stick to a bedtime? Like, what are some things y'all have found?
Levi.
For me, what I was taught was live like a farmer, not like a vampire. So, which basically means is following kind of the rhythms of the day. As Andrew talked about light, I think that's the easiest, most maybe natural indicator. Is as the sun goes down, start to wind down. That doesn't mean go to sleep at 5:30 when the sun's gone. It just means that you should probably be winding down the day, because the sun's going to be up at 6 a.m. and ready to rock and roll, whether you're ready or not. So I would say kind of following the rhythms of the day is helpful. You were asking about specific practices. I think, setting an alarm on your phone. I know this is one of those things where it's like, really, man, that much rigidity? It's got to be that specific. And the answer is, yeah, it does. Until you've developed a competency otherwise. Or if you like that system, then continue forward. I know a thing for me to tie this a little bit into nutrition was everyone talks about eat this many macronutrients or this many grams or this amount of things. And so there was a period of time where I weighed my food. Well, I don't still weigh my food today. Because I now know what it takes. Like I know what 8 ounces of meat looks like. I know what a cup of rice looks like. So I don't need to do that anymore. And that's kind of the same thing with sleep. Set the alarm to go, oh, it's time. I got to shut my computer down. I got to shut my phone down. I need to, use that time then to start speaking with my spouse or winding down, reading a book, something other than technology. So an alarm is very helpful to kind of begin the practice of that. If you're not able to kind of follow the rhythm of the day, then start setting in specific timers for that. And then you'll know really quick whether you're adhering to those or not. It's very rigid. And for someone like me who likes a little bit of spontaneity and chaos, it's hard to follow that. But in order for me to learn that skill, I do need the rigidity to start the practice. And then once it's become a habit, it's more autonomous. And I don't need that much rigidity to know if I'm doing it right or wrong. Then I get to make the decision. Do I want to go to bed at 9:30, 10 o'clock, or am I going to, be a bad boy tonight and stay up till 11? But I know what 9:30 to 10 o'clock does for me as far as performance and well-being and so on. So then I know that I'm kind of pushing that limit. But in order for me to know that, I usually will set some boundaries and some timers to kind of help with that.
I think the only pieces I would add for me is again the kid aspect. This is, I know, not helpful for everyone if you don't have kids, but that's a very nice kind of built-in start to the evening is I have to get my kids down, right? It's almost this idea of how would you treat someone else, right? If you're not a parent, if you don't have kids, what would you do if you are treating yourself as the kid almost? It's like, how would you, if you were going to set something up for someone else to be successful with their sleep, what sorts of things would you do? And then try to imitate that in your own life. And another way to look at that is kind of the complete opposite of if you're trying to set things up for a terrible night's sleep, what would you do? And then do the opposite of those. So again, the idea of kind of kids, I have to put my kids in bed at a certain time. And then it's very easy to kind of use that as a starting point to, okay, starting to wind down for my own bedtime. Another piece I think is kind of this idea of identifying what are the things that keep you from getting a good night's sleep. Is it your phone? Is it your computer? If so, maybe put those in a different room from where you sleep. That's a very, it's easy to say, but it's always challenging to do that because of course it's fun to scroll through your phone. They're built for that, right? So putting those in a different room from where you sleep is helpful. And then one thing that I picked up from Levi, something he's shared with me that I found to be really helpful in my own sleep practice is just be in bed at a certain time, right? I can do that, right? There's still a challenge for me in putting the phone and the computer away on at the right time, right? We know we shouldn't be looking at screens in the evening, but I still do it anyway. One thing you can do is use blue light filters, or there's programs I have a Mac. The name of the program I use is called f.lux, and you can set it to when the sun actually goes down in your time zone, your computer will try to start mimicking the color spectrum, meaning the blue light's filtered out. It starts getting this, it's a dimming effect, and the colors are different. So you can use programs like that if you're going to look at a screen. One of the other hacks I've heard being talked about, if you know you're going to look at a screen, just make sure you're outside to see the sunset. That can potentially help with some of that hormonal release as well. But again, this idea of being in bed, if I can just get in bed, even if I'm looking at my phone for a little bit or looking at my computer for a little bit, I know I can get in bed at 10 o'clock or 10:15. And from there, it does make it a little bit easier to kind of follow the rest of the steps I know I should do. So to me, that's the low barrier to entry is get in bed at this time. And there's some nights where I scroll longer than I should, and some nights where I'm actually tired and I just go to sleep. But for me, that's what's been most helpful.
Mm-hmm. That's great. That's really helpful. Yeah, I think a lot of this, at the end of the day, it comes down to, in my opinion, that a lot of people don't realize just how bad their sleep schedules are to begin with until they start correcting. Now, I don't have like this amazing sleep schedule, but I can say since I become an entrepreneur and I started working on my own schedule, I try most nights to sleep 8 hours, and that has made this world of a difference in my life. Because before this, when I did the startup thing and I was doing 12 to 14 hour days, I'd come home. There'd be lots of times where my wife would look over and I've like literally passed out from exhaustion on the couch and wake up like an hour or two later because I'm sleeping 5 or 6 hours per night and I'm working these long days. I'm trying to do stuff, and it just seemed like this is what everybody else is doing. This is normal, right? This is healthy. And then looking and I'm realizing, oh wow, these are actually bad practices or whatever. Once I actually get on the other side of it and sleep the 8 hours, and I'm like, wow, okay, I can go all day long without like needing to pass out on the couch. A nap is a bonus, I guess, but I mean, it don't require them to continue existing. So I think, yeah, having an honest assessment about like what your actual sleep is like and how you're feeling, which is why I thought that was super cool. We were talking about the sleep journal, which I've never done, but I think that's a really interesting idea. Just kind of having an honest assessment each day, like how do I feel, and then going, okay, I don't feel good. Why? It's just like that, asking the questions, like maybe you can lead yourself. So a follow-up question, can you get, in what you've read and learned this whole, learning about sleep, can you get too much sleep?
Has anyone ever gotten too much sleep? I'm sure there is kind of a, if we go too far, I'm sure there's probably some physiology that maybe is not great, but boy, that's, again, I'm guessing 99% of people aren't even close to that question.
Yeah.
I would say it's more so a matter of when it starts to negatively impact your day or your schedule or your spouse or your family or requirements. That's when I would start maybe worrying about that question. But I'm actually not aware of at least any common issues that arise from too much sleep. That's a good question though.
So this is a little bit still sleep related, but I think more so fitness, well-being, body health related. I know myself, I would love to hear any tips y'all have on this question, but I'm sure people listening also struggle with this. Anybody who does a lot of their job looking at at this thing in front of me, lots of computer time, lots of desk time. What are some tips or ways to mitigate the effects that has on the body throughout the day?
This is a great question, and one that we struggle with as well. As Andrew mentioned, we work online, so we do plenty of sitting and plenty of screen looking at. And once again, for me, it's setting the timers. So on a day that I know that I need to hyper focus and be very efficient, I use a 25-minute on, 5-minute off work cycle. So what I'll do is I'll hyper focus on something for 25 minutes. Everyone can focus for 25 minutes. And then I get 5 minutes of freedom. I can browse the internet. I can answer emails. If that wasn't my focus during that 25 minutes, I can walk around the house, whatever. But that, and you can pick whatever time cycle, but that seems to work the best for me as a Pomodoro technique. And so in that 5 minutes, I'll literally get down and do 2 sets of as many push-ups as I can, or I'll walk outside and I'll do pull-ups on a tree branch, or I'll walk up the hill that I have behind my house here. Like, it sounds really ridiculous, but what's I think really important to take away here is I think we've been fooled into thinking that the only way to train is for 1 hour at the gym and there's no other form of physical activity and exercise. If you want to develop absolute strength and you want to be a power lifter, you got to be in the gym. If you want to be a distance runner, you got to put the miles in. But if you're looking for general health, particularly on those days that you feel overwhelmed, getting out and doing something is better than nothing. So don't think that the 5-minute walk twice in the day is nothing. That's the same thing we talked about when we had you on, Andy, is don't think that saving $10 a month is a waste, because that practice is what will propel you to $100, to $1,000, and so on. And so just doing something as a person that's on the computer a lot is critical. Finding a standing desk to where you're up and down, but just taking those little 5-minute breaks and going on a little bit of a walk. There's a period of time where, and this was post-education, but prior to working in higher education, where I worked a desk job and I would sit there and I would do the same thing. And looking back and reflecting on it, I didn't realize it at the time, but it was to just get movement. I would walk around all the other little office cubbies. I'd come back in, sit down, and then start my work again. And these things are simple. They're not sexy. They seem like they're not going to do anything. And as far as performance goes, they're not. You walking around the office for 5 minutes is not going to make you become Lance Armstrong with your cardio, but it will create blood flow, help your cognitive ability, and all these other things. So it really can be that simple. And think about the total accumulation versus one acute effort in terms of your health and kind of trying to be physically active.
There's just two pieces I'm going to add to that is the two main things that I'm aware of, at least from a research perspective, with kind of what we tend to fall into with this screen issue, right, is posture and vision. And so posturally, one of the things I would say is one of the most important pieces is just changing positions frequently. It's not that you have to sit ramrod straight all the time. It's actually that's not all that helpful either. It's changing so that you're not, one of the negative things that we see is kind of this rounded shoulder, forward head, kind of this position of staring at a screen. So being aware of posture is important and not kind of falling into the worst possible posture. But more so than that, like I said, just getting up and moving around, like Levi mentioned, changing positions, and then going outside. There's a helpful thing here with vision as well, in that if you're always staring at a screen that's 8 to 12 inches ahead of you, your vision actually is affected pretty significantly by that. So going outside and looking at things that are far away is a great antidote to that. So making sure that you're having a balance of, if you're staring at a screen all day, get as much time as you can looking at objects and things that are far in the distance. So again, you can kill two birds with one stone there by going outside for 5 minutes, getting a quick walk, looking at things far in the distance. And then when you're at your desk or when you're sitting, change positions as much as you can, do some standing, do some sitting, and just try to avoid falling into that terrible cervical and upper back posture that's very easy to do. One of the assignments that we have our students do in one of our undergraduate classes is actually, it digs into this research article that looks at the kind of the biomechanics of the neck with forward head posture. So as you tilt your head down to look at a screen, the weight of your head changes. Basically, the weight doesn't change, but the perception or the mechanical advantage or disadvantage of that changes to the amount of stress that it puts on your neck muscles, and the structures of your neck is incredible. It's many times over what the head would normally kind of be just sitting in a neutral position. And so it's interesting to look at all the different medical conditions that are arising now as a result. I mean, there's texter's thumb, there's basically that computer neck. I mean, there's all sorts of orthopedic injuries that we're getting into now as we're shifting into a more technological society. But again, get up, move around, change postures, go look at something far away, and you'll cover your bases pretty well.
Mm-hmm.
That's great. Yeah, I'm sure as you're talking about this, everybody listening is just changing posture, sitting up straight.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's good. It's good. Well, okay, this was fantastic. Honestly, I mean, I think this will be helpful for anybody listening, but this was mainly just me selfishly wanting to ask all these questions to better my own health and wellness. So I really appreciate your time to answer all my questions and chat through all this stuff. If anybody wants to follow Andrew and Levi, I will put all of their information down in the description, or with the audio podcast in the show notes, I believe it's called. But again, let me thank you both very much for all this fantastic, very practical, useful advice, and for your time to hang out with me here on the podcast.
Thanks for having us, Andy.
Thank you, Andy. We appreciate it.